The rifle shot cracked through the morning air like thunder, and Cordelia Whitmore's wedding dress bloomed crimson as she collapsed on the whitewashed steps of St. Augustine's chapel. Through tears she whispered, "Help me," to the stranger who'd been passing by, her voice barely audible over the jeers of the three Harrington brothers standing 20 yards away. Smoke still curling from Caleb's hunting rifle. Maverick Stone didn't think he moved. The drifter had only stopped in Cedar Hollow to water his horse, but now he was scooping the bleeding bride into his arms, her veil trailing in the dust as he carried her behind the church's stone wall. The Harrington boys, Caleb, Jeremiah, and Abel, were known throughout the Tennessee hills as the devil's own spawn, men who took what they wanted and left destruction in their wake. "Should have minded your own business, stranger," Caleb called out, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. The brothers had terrorized Cedar Hollow for years, their father's political connections and vast timber holdings making them untouchable. "That there's our property you're handling." Cordelia's dark eyes met Maverick's as he pressed his kerchief against the bullet wound in her shoulder. She was supposed to marry Mayor Preston that morning, a union arranged to settle her late father's gambling debts to the Harringtons. But she'd tried to run, and Caleb had made sure she understood the price of defiance. "Can you ride?" Maverick whispered urgently, checking his Colt .45. The brothers were advancing now, spreading out like wolves circling prey. Cordelia nodded weakly, and he helped her onto his horse, swinging up behind her as the first shots rang out. They rode hard into the hills, Cordelia's blood soaking through his shirt as she leaned against his chest. Behind them, the thunder of pursuit grew louder. The Harrington boys had rallied half the town, men too scared or too bought to refuse their call. Maverick guided his horse through paths he'd learned in his cavalry days, terrain that would challenge even skilled riders. "Why?" Cordelia gasped as they paused to rest in a hidden cave. "You don't even know me." Maverick studied her face in the dim light, seeing something fierce beneath the pain, a spirit the Harringtons hadn't broken despite years of intimidation. "Maybe that's reason enough," he said simply, reloading his weapon. "Tell me about these brothers. What makes them think they own you?" Her story came in broken whispers. How her father had lost everything to Caleb in a rigged card game. How the debt had passed to her when fever took him. How the Harringtons had claimed her as payment. The marriage to Mayor Preston was meant to legitimize their ownership, making her a political pawn in their expanding empire. As night fell, they could see torches moving through the valley below. The hunt had begun in earnest, and Maverick knew these hills wouldn't hide them forever. The Harrington brothers had money, men, and the law on their side. But they'd made one mistake. They'd hurt an innocent woman in front of a man who'd spent 4 years learning how to kill professionally in the war between the states. Cordelia fell asleep against his shoulder, and Maverick made his decision. Running would only delay the inevitable. If he was going to save her, he'd have to go through the Devil's Sons first. Dawn brought no mercy to Cedar Hollow. Maverick left Cordelia sleeping in the cave, her fever broken but her shoulder still seeping blood through the makeshift bandages. He'd spent the night planning, and now rode openly down Main Street as the town stirred to life, his horse's hooves echoing off the wooden storefronts like a death knell. The Harrington brothers were holding court outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. Their supporters clustered around them like carrion birds. Caleb saw him first, his scarred face splitting into a grin that held no warmth. "Look what the cat dragged back," he drawled, hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Where's our runaway bride, stranger?" Maverick dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate. The street began to clear as townspeople sensed violence in the air. Mothers pulling children indoors while merchants shuttered their windows. Only the brave or the foolish remained to watch. "Name's Maverick Stone," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "And that woman you shot isn't your property." Jeremiah Harrington laughed, a sound like grinding glass. The middle brother was lean and cruel, known for his skill with a bullwhip and his taste for inflicting pain. Property's exactly what she is. Her daddy signed the papers before he died, signed her over to settle his debts. All legal and proper. Contracts signed under duress aren't worth the paper they're written on, Maverick replied. But I didn't come here to debate law with you boys. Abel, the youngest at barely 21, stepped forward eagerly. He was trying to prove himself. To his older brothers, desperate to match their reputation for brutality. Then what did you come for, Drifter? Maverick's hand moved to his gun butt, and the crowd tensed. I came to give you a choice. Leave the woman alone, pack up, and ride out of Cedar Hollow. Today. The laughter that erupted from the brothers was harsh and mocking. Caleb shook his head in apparent disbelief. You got sandstone, I'll give you that. But you're talking to the wrong man. We own this town, lock, stock, and barrel. Sheriff takes our money, judge dances to our tune, and half the businesses owe us more than they'll make in 10 years. That's about to change, Maverick said quietly. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Townspeople watched from windows and doorways, many silently praying for someone to finally challenge the Harringtons' reign of terror. Others calculated which side would win, preparing to switch loyalties accordingly. Then Caleb made his move, going for his gun with practiced speed. But Maverick was faster, his Colt clearing leather and barking flame before Caleb's weapon had fully cleared its holster. The eldest Harrington brother spun and fell, clutching his right shoulder, his gun skittering across the dusty street. Jeremiah and Abel froze, hands half drawn, suddenly realizing they were facing someone far more dangerous than a simple drifter. Maverick kept his weapon trained on them, his expression never changing. Next one goes between the eyes, he said conversationally. Your choice. You just signed your death warrant, Jeremiah snarled, but his hands moved carefully away from his. Weapons. We got 20 men who'll hunt you down. Then bring them, Maverick replied. He backed toward his horse, never taking his eyes off the brothers. But remember, I know these hills too, and I've got nothing left to lose. As he rode away, leaving Caleb writhing in the dust, Maverick heard Jeremiah shouting orders. The war had begun, and there would be no quarter given on either side. Cordelia was sitting up when Maverick returned to the cave, her color better despite the pain etched in her features. She'd heard the distant gunshot and known he'd kept his word he'd gone after the Harringtons alone. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish, she said as he tended the fire. Probably both. Caleb won't be drawing fast for a while, Maverick reported, checking her bandages. But the other two are rallying their men. We need to move deeper into the hills. As they rode through hidden valleys and ancient Cherokee trails, Cordelia began to see the man behind the legend. Maverick knew every stream and deer path, every cave and overlook. He'd learned the land during his cavalry years, but something deeper kept him here, a connection to these wild places that spoke to his restless soul. They made camp in a secluded grove where a spring bubbled up from moss-covered rocks. Cordelia watched him tend their horses with gentle efficiency, marveling at the contrast between his deadly precision with a gun and his tender care for wounded creatures. Tell me about yourself, she said as they shared jerky and hardtack around a carefully concealed fire. What brings a man like you to a place like Cedar Hollow? Maverick was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Been drifting since the war ended. Saw too much death, did too much killing. Thought maybe if I kept moving, I could outrun the ghosts. And can you? Not so far. He looked at her then, and she saw the weight he carried, the burden of a man who'd survived when others hadn't. What about you? Surely a woman like you had choices besides marrying that fool Preston. Cordelia's laugh was bitter. Women in Cedar Hollow don't get choices. We get told what to do and who to marry. My father gambled away everything, including my freedom. The Harringtons made sure I understood the consequences of refusing their arrangement. What consequences? Her eyes darkened with memory. They burned out the Hendricks family when old Thomas couldn't pay his timber debts. 3 children died in that fire. The Harringtons called it an accident, but everyone knew better. Maverick felt something cold settle in his chest. Men who would murder children to make a point were beyond redemption. The war had been brutal, but it had rules. What the Harringtons practiced was pure evil. As night deepened around them, Cordelia moved closer to the fire and to him. The danger they faced had stripped away social conventions, leaving only honesty between them. When she shivered, he offered his coat. When she looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, he felt walls he'd built around his heart begin to crumble. I never thanked you properly, she said softly. For saving my life? No need for thanks, he replied, but his voice was rougher than usual. Any decent man would have done the same. No, she said firmly, her hand touching his cheek. Any decent man would have looked the other way. You chose to stand against impossible odds for a stranger. That makes you something special. Before he could protest, she leaned forward and kissed him softly at first, then with growing passion as he responded. In that moment, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, they found something precious: hope, tenderness, and the beginning of a love worth fighting for. The thunder of hoofbeats woke them before dawn. Maverick was up instantly, Colt in hand, as Cordelia gathered their few supplies. Through the trees, he could see torches, at least 15 riders spreading out to surround their position. Jeremir's smarter than I gave him credit for, Maverick muttered, helping Cordelia onto his horse. He's been tracking us all night. They rode hard through the pre-dawn darkness, branches whipping at their faces as Maverick pushed his mount up treacherous slopes the pursuers' horses couldn't handle. But their reprieve was temporary. The Harringtons had local knowledge too, and enough men to cover every escape route. By mid-morning, they were cornered on a rocky outcrop with nowhere to run. Below, Jeremir Harrington sat his horse like a conquering general, his men arranged in a semicircle that cut off every avenue of retreat. Come down, Peaceful Stone, and we'll make it quick, he called up. Keep running, and I'll take a week killing you both. Maverick studied their position, calculating angles and distances. His rifle held 15 rounds, and he had maybe 50 cartridges for his pistol. Against 15 men, those odds were terminal, but he'd faced worse during Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. There's another way, Cordelia said quietly, reading his thoughts. Let me go down to them. Once they have me, they might let you right away. Not happening, Maverick said flatly. We both go free or neither of us does. You don't understand, they need me alive. Caleb's obsessed with breaking me, making me submit. He won't kill me quickly. Maverick turned to look at her, seeing the terror she was trying to hide. What exactly did that animal do to you? The story came out in whispered fragments. Months of harassment and intimidation, escalating threats against anyone who showed her kindness, Caleb's crude promises of what their wedding night would bring. The Harringtons hadn't just claimed her as property, they'd tormented her with the anticipation of her fate. I won't let them touch you, Maverick vowed, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Whatever it takes. Below, Jeremir was growing impatient. 5 minutes, Stone, then we come up shooting. Maverick checked his weapons one final time, then kissed Cordelia with desperate tenderness. When the shooting starts, get behind those rocks and stay down. Whatever happens, don't come out until it's over. What are you planning? She asked, but she already knew, could see the resolve in his eyes, the acceptance of a man preparing to face impossible odds. I'm going to do what I should have done in the first place, he said simply. End this. Maverick stepped into the open, rifle raised. Jeremiah, you want to finish what your brother started? Come and take me. The challenge hung in the morning air like a thrown gauntlet. Below, horses shifted nervously as their riders realized the drifter wasn't surrendering, was declaring war. Jeremiah's answering shout was full of rage and anticipation. Boys, spread out wide. I want him taken alive if possible, dead if necessary. The attack began with the crack of rifle fire, bullets whining off stone as Maverick dove for cover. But he'd chosen his ground well, the rocky outcrop provided natural fortifications, and the narrow approaches meant the Harrington's superior numbers counted for less. His return fire was precise and deadly, each shot carefully aimed. One rider tumbled from his saddle, then another. The attackers fell back, regrouping beyond rifle range while Jeremiah cursed and shouted orders. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the battlefield, both sides settled in for a siege. But Maverick knew time was against him. Sooner or later, his ammunition would run out, and then Cordelia would face a fate worse than death. The siege stretched through the burning heat of midday. Maverick had picked off 3 more of Jeremiah's men, but his ammunition was running dangerously low. Worse, the Harringtons were showing tactical intelligence he hadn't expected. They'd split their force, sending riders around to flank positions while keeping him pinned down with steady rifle fire. Cordelia huddled behind the rocks, tending a graze on Maverick's arm where a bullet had found its mark. How many cartridges left? She asked quietly. Enough, he lied, though they both knew better. His rifle was down to 3 rounds, and only a dozen bullets remained for his pistol. Against 8 remaining attackers, those numbers told a grim story. A white cloth appeared on a rifle barrel below Jeremiah, calling for parley. Maverick kept his weapon ready but held his fire as the middle Harrington brother rode into the open. You fight well, Stone, Jeremiah called up, but you're a practical man. Let's discuss terms. I'm listening, Maverick replied, though he never lowered his rifle. The woman comes down now, and you ride out free. You have my word as a gentleman. Cordelia made a sound of bitter laughter. His word as a gentleman, she whispered. He gave the same word to the Cherokee families before he burned them out. Maverick's jaw tightened. He'd suspected the Harringtons were behind the mysterious fires that had driven the remaining Cherokee from their ancestral lands, but hearing it confirmed filled him with cold rage. These weren't just criminals. They were murderers and thieves on a scale that made his war experiences seem clean by comparison. Counteroffer, Maverick called down. You and your boys ride out of Tennessee and never come back. The woman stays free, and maybe I don't hunt you down one by one. Jeremiah's answer was a rifle shot that splintered rock inches from Maverick's head. The parley was over, and the final assault began. They came from 3 directions, at once desperate men driven by Jeremiah's promises of gold and land. Maverick's rifle cracked steadily, each shot counting, until the bolt fell on an empty chamber. He drew his Colt, the familiar weight deadly in his hands. The first man to reach the rocks died with Maverick's bullet between his eyes. The second managed 2 steps before joining his companion in hell. But more kept coming, scrambling up the rocky slope with desperate courage born of greed and fear. Cordelia screamed as a bearded giant hauled himself over the boulder wall, knife gleaming in his meaty fist. Maverick spun and fired, but the hammer fell on an empty chamber, his last bullet spent. The giant grinned and lunged forward. Then Cordelia moved, her father's old derringer appearing in her hands like magic. The small pistol barked once, and the giant pitched backward with a look of surprise frozen on his face. Behind you, she cried, and Maverick spun to see Jeremiah himself climbing over the far side of their position, a smoking rifle in his hands. and murder in his eyes for a heartbeat. The two men faced each other across 10 feet of rocky ground, the killer and the protector, the oppressor and the defender. Then Jeremiah raised his rifle, and Maverick knew his luck had finally run out. The shot echoed across the hills like judgment itself, and one of them fell. Jeremiah Harrington crumpled to the rocky ground, a perfect red hole between his eyes. Behind him stood a figure Maverick had never expected to see, Sheriff Augustus Kane, smoking rifle in his hands and a badge glinting on his chest. "Thought you might need some help," Kane said laconically, his weathered face grim. "Been tracking this bunch most of the morning." Maverick slowly lowered his empty pistol, hardly daring to believe their salvation had come from such an unexpected source. "Sheriff, I thought. You thought I was bought and paid for like everyone else," Kane finished. "Can't say I blame you. Been playing that game for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to move against the Harringtons." The remaining attackers were surrendering below, their leader dead and their cause lost. Kane's deputies, 6 hard-faced men Maverick didn't recognize, were rounding them up with professional efficiency. "Federal marshals," Kane explained, seeing Maverick's confusion. "Been building a case against the Harringtons for months. Murder, arson, extortion. We had everything except proof they couldn't buy their way out of. Until today." Cordelia emerged from behind the rocks, still clutching her derringer. "What about Caleb and Abel?" "Caleb's in custody, shoulder patched up and singing like a canary," Kane reported. "Abel ... double quotes," he paused, his expression darkening. "Abel made the mistake of drawing on one of my deputies. He won't be troubling anyone again." As they climbed down from the rocky outcrop, Kane filled in the details. The federal government had been investigating the Harringtons for systematic displacement of Cherokee families, using fabricated debts and manufactured emergencies to steal tribal lands. The brothers had overreached when they started targeting white families as well. That's when Washington had sent in the marshals. "Your little war up here gave us the excuse we needed to move openly," Kane explained. "Public shootout attempted. Murder of a woman, even the bought judges couldn't ignore that." By evening, they were back in Cedar Hollow, where an astonishing transformation had taken place. Shopkeepers who had cowered before the Harringtons now stood proudly in their doorways. Families who had lived in fear were celebrating in the streets. The Devil's Sons were finished, and everyone knew it. Mayor Preston tried to intercept them outside the hotel, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "Sheriff Kane, I demand you arrest this man. He disrupted a legal wedding ceremony and..." "Mayor," Kane interrupted mildly, "I'd suggest you pack your bags. Federal investigators are very interested in your financial arrangements with the Harrington family. Very interested indeed." Preston paled and scurried away like the rat he was. Kane turned to Maverick and Cordelia with something approaching a smile. "So what now?" he asked. "The woman's free, the villains are dead or jailed, and you're both heroes. Sounds like the ending of a dime novel." Maverick looked at Cordelia, seeing his own hopes reflected in her dark eyes. They'd found something precious amid all the violence and chaos, a love tested by fire and proven true. "I reckon," Maverick said slowly, "it might be time to stop running from those ghosts. Maybe settle down somewhere peaceful." Cordelia smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pretty to radiant. "I know just the place," she said. "If you don't mind small towns and stubborn women," Kane chuckled. "Cedar Hollow's going to need rebuilding. New mayor, new businesses, new start all around. Town could use a good sheriff too, if you're interested. Stone. Job pays decent, and the people would follow you anywhere after today." Maverick considered the offer, feeling something he'd thought lost forever stirring in his chest. Hope for the future, purpose beyond mere survival. He'd come to Cedar Hollow running from his past, and found instead a reason to embrace tomorrow. 6 months later, Sheriff Maverick Stone stood on the porch of the house he'd built with his own hands, watching his wife tend the garden she'd planted where once there had been only weeds and sorrow. Cordelia moved gracefully between the rows of vegetables, her hands gentle but sure as she coaxed life from the Tennessee soil. The town of Cedar Hollow had indeed needed rebuilding, both physically and spiritually. The Harrington timber empire had been broken up, the land sold to families who would work it honestly rather than exploit it ruthlessly. New businesses had opened, run by people with integrity instead of fear. Children played in streets that had once echoed with threats and gunfire. "Sheriff Stone?" A young voice called from the gate. Maverick turned to see Tommy Patterson, the blacksmith's son, running up the path with a telegram in his hand. "This just came in on the morning train," the boy panted. Maverick read the message twice, then walked over to where Cordelia was kneeling beside her tomato plants. "News from the federal court in Nashville," he said, showing her the telegram. Caleb Harrington was found guilty on all counts. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. Cordelia sat back on her heels, dirt on her hands and sunlight in her hair. "Good," she said simply. "Now maybe the Cherokee families can come home." That had been another of their projects, reaching out to the displaced families, offering to help them reclaim their stolen lands. Some had returned already, warily at first, then with growing confidence as they saw the changes in Cedar Hollow. The town was slowly healing from the wounds the Harringtons had inflicted. "There's something else," Maverick said, helping his wife to her feet. "Augustus Kane wants to recommend me for territorial marshal. It would mean traveling more, bigger. Jurisdiction." Cordelia studied his face, reading the conflict there. "But you don't want to leave Cedar Hollow." "I don't want to leave you," he corrected gently. "This place, it's the first home I've had since before the war. And you're the first person who's made me want to stop running." She smiled, the expression that had stolen his heart in a moment of desperate danger. "Then don't run. Kane can find another marshal. This town needs its sheriff, and I need my husband." That evening, they sat on their porch swing as the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The distant sound of laughter drifted from the town square where the weekly dance was beginning, young couples spinning to the music of fiddles and guitars. "Do you ever regret it?" Cordelia asked quietly. "Stopping here instead of riding on?" Maverick considered the question, thinking of the man he'd been rootless, haunted, carrying his ghosts like a burden too heavy to bear. The war had taken so much from him: friends, innocence, faith in human decency. But it had also prepared him for the moment when he'd been needed most, when love required him to stand against impossible odds. "Never," he said firmly, pulling her closer. "Every mile I rode, every fight I survived, every mistake I made, it all led me here. To you." A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, bright and brief as hope itself. Cordelia made a wish on it. Those she didn't need to, all her dreams had already come true. She'd found a man worthy of her love, a town worthy of her loyalty, and a future bright with possibility. In the town square, the music swelled as couples joined hands for the Virginia reel. Mayor Whitman, elected honestly by grateful citizens, raised a toast to the sheriff and his lady, the heroes who had freed Cedar Hollow from the devil's sons. But Maverick and Cordelia needed no toast, no recognition, no reward beyond what they'd already found in each other's arms. They'd learned that love wasn't just passion or romance, it was the willingness to fight for something bigger than yourself, to stand against darkness for the sake of light, to build something lasting from the ashes of what was broken. "Tears," she had whispered, "help me," and he had answered by taking on forces that seemed unstoppable. But love, they'd discovered, was the most unstoppable force of all, strong enough to redeem the past, transform the present, and illuminate the future with hope. As the stars emerged one by one above Cedar Hollow, Sheriff Maverick Stone held his wife close and knew he was finally, completely home.